Welcome back to another episode of Valentine's Engineering. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to be showing you around my MZ21 Toyota Soarer. Every time I go to a show, I have to explain the story of how I got this car, because it's fairly wild and out there. It wasn't just, oh yeah, I like that car, I'll give him a wad of cash, and there we go. Yeah, there's a bit of a story behind it, so I'm going to give you a walk around the car and I'm going to show you everything and I'll give you the whole story behind it. So here we go. So let's go back to 2020. COVID had just happened. Everyone was in lockdown. Everyone was stuck inside their houses. No one could do anything. Projects were getting done left, right and centre. I started personally looking for parts for my Datsun 280ZX project that I had going. And one of my friends got in touch with me and said he's helping clear out a yard in Norfolk. He said it was an old boy's plot of land and they had to clear it out. And he had hundreds and hundreds of cars, hundreds of classic cars in there. So, and he had some Datsun 280ZXs. So I thought, I'll take it upon myself, go have a little look down there. Got given some very, very vague directions on how to get there. Like, they didn't actually want people to know where the site was. And when I tipped up, I realised why. It was filled with hundreds of classic American, Japanese, English cars, most of them in a state of disrepair, but so many rarities in there, it was absolutely unbelievable. There was stuff in there like four-wheel drive Sunny saloons. There was so many Bluebirds that I could see, including turbo executive models. There were Gran Torinos, there was a 65 fastback Mustang, there were coupe Mustangs, there was Oldsmobile estates, there was a Ford Galaxy estate. It went on and on and on. A Z28 Camaro that I nearly personally came away with anyway. And while I was going through the woods being absolutely mesmerised by everything that was there, I found this stored in the woods with a piece of tarp on top of it. I could not believe what I was seeing. So basically I made a deal there and then. I said I'd help them clear the yard out, I'd give them the labour, I'd help them sell parts, I'd help them sell cars, because they were looking for people to help sell Japanese car parts, and I thought I'd give it a go, but I wanted a deal on this. So fast forward months and months and months ahead, clearing down all these woodlands to get to it, I finally got the car. Now unfortunately, I took a gamble on it. It wasn't going to run. It had been in the woods for 20 odd years. I took a gamble on the rust because it was on the floor. I could not see underneath it whatsoever. To get it out, I had to dig a trench in the soil, front and rear, to be able to get a jack underneath the subframes to put a block of wood in the wishbone suspension at the front and at the back, so that I could actually be high enough to get it on my trailer. But once I got it home, I started investigating it and found out what I actually needed to do. Now the 7M GTE that was in it was absolutely toast. I'm talking, it just popped everywhere. There was rusty coolant everywhere, all over here. It was oily as hell. It was just completely dead. The old dear even told me, oh yeah, I ran that until it died. And I thought, magic, cheers for that. So I pulled the whole engine out, I pulled everything out of here, everything came out of the bay, and I just intended to rebuild the 7M as it was. But when I took the head off, because it had sat for 20 odd years with a blown head gasket, the water was in the cylinder. It was in cylinder 6 so much it actually pitted the bore. And I was like, oh Christ, I didn't want to go down the route of sleeving it or anything like that. So I put the word out, and because everyone chucked 7Ms and wanted a 1J, there weren't any about in England. There was one in Scotland though, or should I say two, and the bloke came up with a deal for me, and he was like, you can have both of them and all that for the same price. So I had both of them from him. He told me one was in pieces but one worked, but I wasn't going to take his word for it. So when I got it, I took it apart, and I'm glad I did, because there was so much electrolysis in the block, I just wasn't going to chance it. So the engine went out. I had the block decked and the head skimmed and all cleaned and everything, and then I rebuilt the whole thing. Every bolt and stud that could have been done was replaced with ARP. We've got an MLS head gasket in there as well, and we've done a couple of modifications to sort the oil pressure problem as well when it's low on idle, because 7M's are notoriously low oil pressure on idle. You barely registers on the scale or barely registers on the gauge, and it makes you keep your foot on the throttle when you're in traffic just so you get a bit more oil pressure. So yeah, I've done a couple of the mods for that, but everything that could be replaced was replaced. All new gaskets, all new silicone hoses. I tried to keep a lot of things like OEM in here as well, so there are a lot of things what I just tarted up. But she's still in a break-in period. She technically hasn't done 500 miles yet, but touch wood, she's still running sweet as a nut. So yeah, we just got to hope and pray that she breaks in. While the 7M was out as well, I took the liberty of removing the front subframe and the rear subframe while I was at it. And I wanted to assess the rust damage that I might have been dealing with underneath this car, being as it was sat in mud for 20 odd years. And I could not believe how clean the car was. It's the cleanest car, it was the cleanest car that I'd ever seen. I could not believe it sat outside for 20 years and it was still looking like it was fresh out the factory. I know a lot of people say that when they're selling the car, but I just could not get over it. There was not a drop of surface rust on the sills. There was not any surface rust on the chassis legs or the floor pan. The only bit of surface rust that there was underneath the rear subframe. And I only saw that when I dropped it out. All I had to do then was I ground it down. I ground it down to bare metal. I treated it, I primed it, and then I undersealed the whole car. So in all the crevices with all the struts and everything out, it's all been undersealed, the whole thing. Fuel tank was out at the same time. It's all been done from there all the way through to the front. The whole car's undersealed. Both front subframes came off. Both subframes came off, front and rear. All the bushes got removed. They were sent out for blasting and powder coating, so the subframes are now all fresh. The rear, I put in a set of adjustable arms, what I made myself. They are all stainless steel with rose jointed ends. They have a great deal of adjustability on them. So I made them the same as I made it for my A70 Supra, so they're all on. That's another thing to bear in mind with these, if you've got one yourself. These share a lot of parts with an A70 Supra. The subframes, the fuel tanks, everything is the same. Obviously, the engine is near enough, well, it's basically the same engine anyway. There might be one or two differences, but the whole thing, near enough, is just an A70 floor pan on this. So they were all done. The other things that I'd done as well were, I really wanted these SSR Mark IIs, really wanted them. So I decided to make a set of 5 to 4 stud adapters. I keep getting asked every time I post a picture of this car, like, you know, how have you got that on there? How have you got those wheels on there? And I made these spacers. You cannot buy these spacers, or you couldn't when I made them. And I found out why, basically. Like, when you actually put the spacers on a piece of paper to kind of see where the bolt holes line up, one is awfully close to another. So you have to have a very slimline internal drive nut, which goes down and misses the thread of the other one completely. Now, because you have to have an internal drive, it has to be a certain size, or a certain width, basically, so you have enough drive, you have enough hex to be able to tighten it up to the torque that you actually need it to be tightened up to. So these have got to be about 30, 35 or 40 mil spacers to suit this nut and everything else that's in it. And that's why these wheels stick out a bit further. But I personally think that this is perfect fitment for this car, so they ain't going nowhere. MOT lad don't like it, but what's he gonna do about it? The other thing as well as I done was I made the custom wheel nuts as well, and I made centre caps what bolt to the spacers. These are housing the Toyota Soarer emblems, because I found all 4 of them in the car from the original wheels. No original wheels in sight. There was some terrible, like, Fox racing wheels on them, but the emblems were still there. All the centre caps were still there, so I wanted to make it a bit of a viewpoint for the car. Also, with the subframes and the arms, everything that could have been polybushed was polybushed. So both subframes were polybushed completely. The adjustable arms as well, you couldn't really buy any polybushing kits because I'd custom made the ends. So I ended up buying a bar of polyurethane and turning them myself. So they're all custom made polybushers. The anti-roll bars are white line anti-roll bars as well with adjustable drop links, but they're also polybushed to go with the rest of it. The diff was taken out and rebuilt as well by an LSD specialist in the UK, so that's all been done as well. We're back to having like a lovely LSD. Some of the other things as well were, the car was a limited, but it didn't come with spats or skirts. So I had to buy them separately, and because there's about 25 of these in the UK, no one had any. So I had to look further afield. No one really had them in Japan either, but I managed to find a pair of both of them. The skirts, unfortunately, one of them had been in an accident, so it was wrapped underneath the car. But because these are like the OEM plastic, they're very, very flexible. So I was able to bend it back out and everything's fine. You've got a little bit of a crease in this corner here, but I'm not going to moan about that. I ended up actually spending more money getting the skirts and the spats over here and purchasing them than I did purchasing the car. With the back end, like I said, the fuel tank was dropped out, all the lines were dropped out, everything was undersealed, checking for any signs of rust whatsoever, and there was nothing. So essentially underneath the car was fine, lights were fine, bumper was fine, everything's fine. It's got a full 2.5-inch exhaust system that I made myself, as you can see with the tip back there. Because it's limited as well, it came with these rear lights, which are different to the GZ20 lights. It also came with this 3-piece spoiler as well, which I didn't realise how rare it actually was. But I thought the back was missing something, and I really wanted this roof spoiler. Well, there was a couple of fiberglass places that apparently done it, but they were in Japan, they didn't want to deal with foreigners, so I thought maybe I can make one myself. And luckily someone put me in touch with the Z20 Facebook page, and some genius, has made a 3D printer file for this spoiler. So I got the file, chopped it down into sizes what would fit on my 3D printer, printed it out. I think there was something like 18 pieces I printed it out in. And then one by one, I glued them together while they were on the car. And then once they were done, I removed it, fiberglassed it, and then filled it and painted it. And it's come out brilliantly. I've done it out of ABS as well, so it wouldn't warp in the sun or anything like that. People ask me about it as well, like where I got it from. You just have to tell them, like, I made it. And unfortunately, there's then followed with questions of, can you make me one? Another thing I've done as well with like the back end of this car was to do with some of the interior. Because this is a limited, it came with the TV system and CD changer and massive computer what was in the back of the car. I didn't want any of that. The screen was smashed. The screen was smashed, but I didn't want to take it out because I didn't want to try and find something what would fit in the trim. And also as well, I needed the room where the computer was for the larger compressor tank for the airbag suspension. So I ended up taking the computer out, and these speaker boxes in here, they were apparently a limited feature as well. They'd all been chewed out by rats, mice, whatever had got in the car over the years in the woods. So I hollowed them out, and I put a pair of Bluetooth speakers in them what pair to each other and work on a permanent live from the ignition. So the speaker quality is actually a lot better than it would have been back in 1987 when this car came out. And I saved myself a hell of a lot of money trying to chase around, trying to find a head unit what would actually fit the front. The interior is pretty much how it was when it was left in the woods. I kind of wanted to keep the distressed look, just because, I don't know, it just kind of feels a bit right to me. The centre console, as you can see here, is all just a bit bitty and ripped. So there's the handbrake bit, the wear on the leather chairs. It's all the green leather interior that they loved putting in their cars in the 80s and stuff. You'll notice this manual as well. When the engine was out, I did put in a R154 gearbox. It's got to come out soon though, because it has got an input shaft wind, which I didn't know. I took a gamble on it. So we've got to get that fixed, we've got to get that rebuilt. I put the quick release steering wheel on there and the steering boss and the steering wheel on there. The steering wheel I funnily got from Japan just last year when we went up, and that was in Up Garage, so I grabbed all of that. Put an oil pressure gauge in it as well. Like I said, it's still got all the Digi-Dash in it, the TV unit and stuff like that in it. TV unit doesn't work, Digi-Dash does, which I was very, very surprised about. Someone had tried at some point to do something with this car, because when I found it, the rear seats were all out. I managed to find the back rear is still in the car, but the bottom of it was long gone. So just to fill the gap, I got a Mark III Supra rear seat. bottom half, and it actually fits really well. It's not the leather like we wanted for the rest of it, but beggars can't be choosers, can they, really, in some cases. We've got the airbag controls in here, or the pressure gauges in here. But the airbag controls, I was being a bit cheap at the time, really, when I put the airbag in here. That's another thing we've got to say. This is airbag suspension as standard. Toyota put airbag suspension in this. It's still on the standard airbag suspension struts. It's just all I've done is I've replaced the tank with a larger tank. It didn't have a tank, sorry, it didn't have a tank. And I replaced the compressor with a big compressor. All it had on it was a compressor. So if you turned it and pressed that button over there and told it you wanted to go higher, you'd have to wait for 5 minutes for that tiny little compressor stored in the front bumper to blow it up enough for you to be a little bit higher. But now we've got a large compressor, a large air tank, and it's able to go up and down. I didn't want to pay all the money for the digital management, so I ended up going with manual management. And while it works and it's fun, I do kind of miss the easiness of just pressing one button. Hello, Trouble. Sorry, my cat's just distracted me. Hello, Trouble, you coming in? Come on. So in here, this is where we keep the manual toggles. All the airlines route through to here. So just got to be a bit careful on what you put on the carpet, really, and stuff like that, for, just in case anything goes through the airlines. But let's take a look at her party piece, shall we? Because I didn't think anyone was expecting her to be able to go as high or as low as she actually does. So I hope you guys enjoyed this little walk round of my MZ21 Soarer. I ain't bragging, but she's beautiful, isn't she, you know. I've got some other plans for her in the future. I kind of want to keep the paint. Some people have said just refresh her. I don't really want to. It's that pearl white, what Toyota done, and the gold, and it's distressed in certain areas, like the boot, the roof, the bonnet. They're so dry because they were just out in the sun for all that time, never being clean. But I like the distressedness of it. It's a story. There's a story behind it. Another thing that I've got to do, I know that, is I'll pull the engine again, because it's easier to get an R154 off with the engine out. But I also need to put, I think it was new. No, I did do new squirters. Well, it's in my list. It's on my list. It's on my list of things to do. So I need to pull the gearbox, pull the engine. The other thing that I have done is, because these are the factory airbags, they are so wallowy. You can set this car to a nice medium height to be able to drive it around, and the second you stop at traffic and then put your foot down to actually take away from a traffic light, it plows into the ground because they just wallow. There's no firmness in the shock whatsoever. So I've made a set of coilover bodies to suit rims carnated airbags. So I will be upgrading to coilover airbag system, and we'll see if we can obviously drive lower and stuff like that. I love the 15s. I did toy with the idea for a little while for having like split rim 17s, like something really deep like my Supra's got, but honestly, they just make it, don't they? They just make it. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, guys. ask me about it if you see it at a show and all that. I'll never not want to answer questions about it. If I can help you with things on your one, then just leave me a comment and I'll try and help you or something like that. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this one, guys. All right, so we'll see you around. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and yeah, keep my ego boosted. See you guys.